I thought we started really well. I thought we were competitive. I thought we played with energy in the first 5 minutes. And then, when they kind of went on their first run, it kind of deflated us a little bit, which I'm not really sure why. But the offense, I think, for us, like, it starts on defense. And we, struggled, scouting report-wise. We struggled personnel. We struggled to do what the coaches asked of us. And then, overall, like, they just played with more energy and effort. And, those are the things that just can't happen.
I was disappointed because I felt like there was a lack of competitive fire. With the exception of about 2 5-minute spurts, our attention to detail was poor. I'm not sure if it's not knowing the game plan as much as, because if it's not knowing the game plan, then that's a whole nother conversation, as much as not executing the game plan. Our attention to detail, undisciplined. I felt like our energy and our competitive fire was not there, and that's disappointing.
Golden State's a really good team. They're well coached. They do things really well. They play everyone close. But I think we kind of shot ourselves in the foot. And even though we shot 30% and 22% from the field, yeah, that stinks. And we didn't make very many baskets across the board, other than really KK was really the only one to really shoot well. We can still find a way to win. Like, we got to get to the free throw line more. We got to do whatever it takes to find a way to win and not let that be deflating toward our defense.
Look, Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White clearly like and respect one another, right? But that doesn't mean they always see eye to eye. And I am beginning to suspect more and more that there's a bit of a divide between the way that they see the game and the way that they think the Indiana Fever should play. You can just hear what they have to say and connect the dots a little bit. Not to mention, it didn't go well against the Golden State Valkyries. That was obvious to everybody, of course. Just a rough performance from the Fever. And on its own, that wouldn't be that big a deal. Clark just back, getting her acclimated, all those things. But it's these repeated statements or this issue that seems to be lingering under the surface when it comes to the team's offensive identity that is interesting.
There was a moment in the arena when everything felt like it was about to shift. The crowd was buzzing, the banners were waving, and Caitlin Clark had returned to the hardwood after sitting out with injury. Spirits were high, momentum seemed to be building, and the Fever had every reason to believe they were on the brink of something special. Just days before they'd raised a trophy. They had dismantled the Aces, they had outplayed the Lynx, they had finally begun to look like a team that could contend. But then came the Valkyries, and then came the unraveling. From the tip-off, something was off. Clark tried to inject life into her team, but the rhythm was never there. The energy that had surged through their previous games evaporated. The passes weren't crisp. The spacing was sloppy. The players didn't look like themselves. And as the minutes ticked by, what started as a slow stumble turned into a full-on collapse. It wasn't just a loss. It was a complete failure of execution, effort, and identity. And as the final buzzer echoed through the building, there was no confusion about what had happened. The team had fallen apart. And for many, the responsibility for that didn't just rest on the players, it landed squarely at the feet of the head coach. When the post-game press conference rolled around, fans and analysts were hoping for reflection, maybe accountability, or at the very least, a clear-eyed assessment of what went wrong. What they got instead was something very different. Stephanie White didn't point inward. She didn't address her choices. She didn't speak to the rotations or the offensive confusion. Instead, she pointed fingers. She talked about lack of energy. She questioned her team's competitiveness. And most of all, she painted a picture that distanced her from the disaster that had just unfolded. For Caitlin Clark, this wasn't just another game. It was supposed to be a comeback moment, a statement performance, a return to the lineup that would remind the league who she was and what the Fever could be. But instead, it became a turning point for all the wrong reasons. She had worked tirelessly to recover. She had spent weeks mentally preparing, and when the day finally came, her return was overshadowed by chaos, confusion, and coaching decisions that many believe cost the Fever the game. There was a decision to change the starting lineup, removing a key defender and shooter who had helped stretch the floor during the team's best stretch of basketball. There was a choice to move Clark away from her natural position, placing her in a role that diminished her impact and disrupted her rhythm. There was a shift in offensive strategy that slowed the game down and forced players into uncomfortable roles. And perhaps most importantly, there was no adjustment when those choices began to fail. The Valkyries didn't just win, they exposed everything that was broken about the Fever's approach. They capitalized on missed rotations, exploited the lack of spacing, and punished every bad shot and slow recovery. And when Clark was on the bench, the team looked lost. The offense sputtered, the ball barely moved, the defense sagged, and the energy that had been so electric in previous games turned into visible frustration. Despite all of this, the coach's response after the game was to double down. No mention of lineup changes, no breakdown of the strategy that backfired, no acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, some of the decisions made from the bench had contributed to the loss. Instead, the message was clear. The team didn't compete hard enough. The players didn't execute. The problem wasn't the system, it was the people in it. But Clark, in her own comments, took a very different tone. She acknowledged the struggles. She owned the performance. She didn't shy away from the fact that things went wrong. She admitted that the team had difficulty executing the game plan, but rather than casting blame, she focused on solutions, on improvement, on what needed to happen next. And that contrast between the player taking responsibility and the coach dodging it only deepened the frustration, because it raised questions that fans and insiders had been whispering for weeks. Is the system the right one? Are the players being put in positions to succeed? And if not, who's going to step up and make the changes needed before this season slips away? The numbers from the game told the story just as clearly. The Fever shot poorly from the field, their three-point attempts rarely connected, and their ball movement was stagnant. They were out-rebounded, out-hustled, and out-coached by an expansion team that was supposed to be a work in progress, not a powerhouse. And yet, it was the Valkyries who looked polished, poised, and prepared. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a second loss to the same team in the same season. The first might have been excused. This one couldn't be, especially not when the Fever had been riding a high just days before. Something had shifted. And it wasn't just the players who were different, it was the system they were playing in. The choice to start a different point guard and move Clark to an unnatural role baffled analysts. She's known for her court vision, for her ability to dictate tempo, for making the right pass at the right time. Stripping her of that control turned the offense into a mess. She became a decoy rather than a leader. She was forced to run around off ball, setting screens instead of running plays. And the flow that had made the Fever dangerous disappeared. When the offense began to break down, the solution should have been to pivot, to adjust, to bring back the system that had worked. But that didn't happen. The coach stayed the course despite the results. And when it was all over, instead of reflecting on those choices, she shifted the blame. Meanwhile, Clark continued to carry herself like a veteran beyond her years. She didn't deflect. She didn't lash out. She accepted the criticism and vowed to improve. But it was clear to anyone watching that something deeper was happening. A disconnect, a tension, and maybe even the beginning of a larger conversation about what kind of leadership this team really needs. The Fever had shown what they were capable of when things clicked. They had proven that they could beat elite competition, play with rhythm, and dominate on both ends. But all of that had come under a different approach, with a different lineup and a different mindset. The contrast between that version of the team and the one that showed up against the Valkyries couldn't be more stark. Clark's most telling moments didn't come from the court this time, they came from the press room. Her words carried more weight than any stat line. She acknowledged what went wrong, broke down how the team had failed to match the opponent's energy, and admitted they fell short in executing the plan. She didn't single anyone out. She didn't look for excuses. She looked for solutions. That kind of leadership doesn't go unnoticed. She knew the offense had fallen apart. She spoke about the lack of energy and how the early momentum faded after the Valkyries made their first run. It was a moment that exposed the team's vulnerability. Rather than regrouping, they looked stunned, deflated, and disoriented. That's where leadership from the sidelines is supposed to come in: adjustments, substitutions, new energy. Instead, the same game plan remained in place, even as it failed repeatedly. There's a growing concern that Clark is being misused, not just once, but consistently. putting her at small forward, pulling her away from her strengths, limiting her minutes in crucial moments. These aren't minor decisions. They affect the entire structure of the game. It changes how defenses react, it disrupts the spacing, and most of all, it sends a message to the team that the system matters more than the people in it. Lexi Hull's absence in the starting lineup sent shockwaves. She had been a stabilizing force, a dependable defender, a reliable shooter. Her presence on the floor gave Clark space to operate and opened up the game for everyone else. But she was benched without explanation, and the result was a disjointed mess. Fans and analysts alike noticed how the chemistry vanished the moment the rotations changed. The entire game felt like a missed opportunity. The fans were there, ready to rally behind their star player's return. The arena was electric before tip-off. And then, as the game unfolded, that energy turned into disbelief. It was as if everyone watching could feel what was happening. Something was deeply wrong. And it wasn't just about missed shots or bad passes. It was about direction, identity, purpose. The Valkyries didn't just outplay the Fever, they exposed their weaknesses. They played faster, smarter, and with more urgency. They grabbed offensive rebounds like they wanted it more. They capitalized on every moment of hesitation. And as the Fever struggled to find answers, the opposing bench looked calm, collected, and confident. The difference between the two teams went far beyond talent. It came down to leadership, preparation, and adaptability. One side made the right adjustments, the other refused to make any. The Fever's once fluid offense now looked like a confusing, static machine with no clear direction. Ball movement slowed. Players stood around waiting for something to happen. And when they did move, it often looked forced and chaotic. Stephanie White's choices continued to puzzle those watching. The decision to pair two ball handlers and push Clark off the ball might have worked with more preparation, but this was their first real game-time experience together. No real reps, no chemistry, no rhythm. It was an experiment rolled out in front of a sold-out home crowd, and it failed in plain sight. Clark's ability to lead, even in these moments, stood out. During the few stretches when she was given control of the offense again, things briefly clicked. She moved the ball with purpose, created open looks, and brought structure back into the chaos. But those moments were too few, too late, and quickly undone by the lack of consistency in rotations. That third quarter, where Clark briefly regained control, showcased everything she brings to the table: points, assists, leadership, poise. But the moment passed quickly. She was pulled from the floor again, and the offense once again fell flat. It was as if the team had found a match but refused to light it. And then came the aftermath. While Clark was composed and mature in addressing the defeat, her coach doubled down on her disappointment with the players. She spoke of discipline, focus, and competitive fire, but never once did she mention her own role. Never once did she acknowledge that the lineup changes or strategy might have contributed to the collapse. That silence was loud. It didn't go unnoticed. Players notice when a coach refuses to own up to their part. Fans notice when rotations are inconsistent and unexplained. Analysts notice when a team goes from cohesive and dangerous to clumsy and uncertain in a matter of days, all because of coaching choices. It's hard to shake the feeling that something larger is brewing. The idea that Clark might soon be forced to make a decision about her role in this organization is no longer just speculation. It's becoming a real question. If the system continues to suppress what makes her great, and if leadership refuses to evolve, then it may come down to a choice: stay and hope things change, or speak up and demand a shift in direction. Some believe she needs to walk into the front office and make her voice heard, not out of ego, but out of necessity. She's not just a star player, she's the face of the franchise. She draws the crowds, she brings the energy, she represents the future. And if she's going to give everything to this team, then the team needs to meet her halfway. That means smart coaching, that means accountability, that means playing to strengths instead of forcing square pegs into round holes. The Fever have shown they can win. They've shown they can compete, but only when the players are put in positions to succeed. Fans have already started asking hard questions. How many more games like this can the Fever afford? How many more times will they let leads slip away because of poor rotations or rigid systems? How long can they suppress the talents of someone like Clark before she decides enough is enough? No one is calling for chaos, but they are calling for change, for adaptation, for a coaching staff willing to admit when something isn't working and pivot accordingly. because this league is too competitive, the margin for error too small, and the window for success too narrow to waste opportunities like this one. Clark gave the team a glimpse of what's possible. Her return could have been the start of something incredible. Instead, it became a cautionary tale of what happens when strategy overrides instinct, when structure stifles freedom, and when leadership fails to lead. There's still time. The season is far from over. The pieces are still there. The talent is undeniable. But now it's up to the people in charge to recognize what's happening before it's too late. The Fever don't just need wins. They need direction. And it's going to take more than talent to get there. It's going to take accountability, clarity, and the courage to admit when change is necessary. Until that happens, games like this may continue to haunt them. And Caitlin Clark's patience, along with the fans, may begin to run out.